So I was interested in the hashtag, with keeping it nerdy. So I'm going to try and add a bit of nerdy, but I'm a VP of sales, so I have to be careful. Otherwise, my staff might think that I know something about being nerdy. But I was a software developer many years ago, so watch out. So a little bit about me, because it is important. So I've got a background in customer experience, in content management and publishing systems, digital asset management, portals, knowledge management, mobile, chatbots, process, and typography. That means that I've been in content and process for many years when I used to have brown hair. But, why is that important for today? Well, you take this off the Liferay site and you can see portals, content management, collaboration, mobile, workflow, business process automation, developer tools, right? So I've really been in this market for a few years. But the interesting thing is, right, I've been focused on managing content, right? Putting content in systems that manage it and publish it, right? So, web content management, web publishing, document management, digital asset management. How do I move content through a process? What channels, chatbots, mobile, all the expansion of channels over the years, and more about automation. But the one thing is actually, right, that if you look at the DXP platform, that's what the DXP platform is bringing together, right? Intranets, customer self-service portals, websites, commerce. And it's been really interesting for me over the years to see that those platforms were separated, right? You'd have a separate e-commerce to a shop, right? Would be your shop. You'd have a separate marketing site. You'd then have a portal for your logins and your self-service, right? And they were all separate systems. And it's great to see Liferay bringing those together into one platform, because that's when you get real good customer experience. And that's great, right? Isn't that great? Managing publishing, right? Wrong, right? And I say wrong, not because there's anything wrong with Liferay, right? It's because I'm now looking at content from a different point of view, because I'm looking at it from the quality of the content that I've been managing and publishing for 25 years. And as somebody who's been managing and storing and publishing content, how much have I really thought about the quality of that content? Hardly any. But I now work for a company where this is what we do, right? We think about the quality of that content. How does it align to you? So let me ask you, how many of you write emails to your colleagues or write documents on a daily, weekly basis, right? And when you do that, how many of you think about how should I write this? What tone of voice should I think about? How should I be active or passive, right? And are those your own guidelines, or are they your company guidelines? Right. How many of you use your company guidelines? Do you even know if you've got company guidelines? Yeah, we do. But that's the problem, you see. There's a lot of money that goes into writing guidelines and terminology and all of these things, but nobody knows how to operationalize those things. And that's what I want to talk about today. Because our view is if you put garbage in, you get garbage out. So, customer experience, there's a lot of people talking about customer experience. So I talk about the hidden C, right? So what does the C in CX stand for? Is it customers, obviously? But I'd like to tell you that I think it's about content as well, because great content drives great customer experience. But what does quality mean of content, right? What do we actually mean by quality, and how do you decide whether you're writing good quality? Right? And how can you do this on a large scale? Because you all do it individually, but you don't do it as part of your company. And we think of quality as many things. It's, yes, spelling and grammar, very obvious. But actually, if you're working for a large organization that has teams around the world where English is not their natural language, it's very interesting to see how much inconsistency you can get in one company. Right? Terminology, glossaries, acceptable and preferred content, terms, phrases. How do you know that you're not using banned words or words that your company would prefer you not to use, right? And how are you using, what sort of sentences are you using? Long, short? How are you making sure this gives the audience the message they need? So you've seen people, very famous people, stand up and talk and give great speeches, right? And so there was a great series of videos done by the Daily Telegraph, which you can find online, which is about the power of words, use them wisely, right? And I've just asked you this, how many of you know your company rules? Very few of you said that you knew them. Some of you said that you've got them, and probably none of you know how often they get updated, right? So, but is that important, right? And I think it is important, right? There's an impact of poor quality content, and we've done quite a lot of work on this. And the idea is that, yes, it's about your brand and trust, as was talked about today, customer engagement, sales, satisfaction, okay? You know, we're working with a large manufacturer, which I won't talk about. I won't say who they are. But even within their own company, their own name was spelt 15 different ways by their own employees on their own, with their own documentation, right? Now, what they have is a program across their 14 divisions now, or 14 departments, that all contribute to their customer experience, trying to create consistent communication, both internally and externally. And they're talking about savings of 100 million euros by getting their consistency of their content correct, right? Sounds very simple, but there's a lot of wastage that goes on in your companies. So I want you to think about yourselves for a minute, right? So how do you've just told me that you all think like individuals, you all write like individuals, right? You've all got your own, you don't think like your company, you write like yourselves. Because we all write like we're educated, or our surroundings, or how we think we want people to read what we've sent to them. But how does that change how a company gets thought about? So I think it's obvious that you know that a company is made up of many people, right? Different types of people, right? The outgoing people, the extroverts, the introverts, right? Many different people make up a company today. And so if they're all writing based on how they feel, right? How is that persona of your company being managed, right? Companies are one big person, but made up of many, right? If you were all working for the same company, you've all got your own tone of voice, your own way of writing, but you're not writing as one big person. And all of you think differently. You all want to express yourselves differently. And that's great. So we're not trying to stifle innovation. We're trying to allow you to innovate, but within a framework that allows your business to be one. Right. So if you think about it, if you were all writing today for one company, I imagine you'd all be writing again on different guidelines, different views. So if you think about it, your company becomes blurry. The image of your company is a bit blurry, right? I'm not saying that it's not understandable what you're writing, but it gives different views, different perceptions, right, of the same thing. We all do, right? I'm sure if I asked you to describe what Liferay does, you'd all describe it well, but you'd all have different ways of describing it, right? Probably none of them that match the way that the marketing director of Liferay would like you to describe it. So, what should we think about? Right. And I think the one word that we think about is consistency. Right. It's really important that we get consistency across an organization. Right. Consistency, meaning. So when you write, do you really realize what you're trying to say? Right? Yes, I think many of you in this audience said, yes, I do. Okay? But how do you test that? How many times do you get a call that says, what do you mean by that? I've read your email, but I'm not quite sure what you're saying. Do you get that? No? I get that. I get my staff. I've got one of my staff in the audience, Jan. He phones me up and says, what do you mean by that? I mean, the question was, why haven't you sold anything this month, right? And the message, are we getting that message across, right? Is that message the message that we want to give? Right? And that's something that AI can check, right? Because we can linguistically, and we're not the only ones in this business, I'm sure you know some of the names, we can check to see what the intent of that language is. What is it you're trying to say? Is it clear? Right? Is it consistent? Right? Because we think about the audience. Right? What is the audience that you're trying to reach? Who are you trying to reach? Right? How many of you got children? Some of you, a few of you, right? When your sons or daughters, if they're in their teens, speak to you, do they use the same language as you? Do the same words have the same meaning as you use? Completely different, right? I'm not sure when my son says that's bad, whether that's good or bad, right? Or if he says that's sick, does that mean that's good or bad, right? How do I know, right? But there's a generational thing, right? So we've got to understand those linguistic nuances about when we're writing, what audience are we writing for? So how many of you have been involved when you're building your applications around content process, content strategy, how do we get content to the web? Any of you ever been involved in those content processes? Okay. Has content strategy ever come up as a project process? It's a big growing thing now. We're seeing a lot of companies now starting to have people who are heads of content strategy, okay? Because actually they're starting to realize that that customer experience and getting that strategy right, getting that content production right, getting the messaging right makes a big difference to their goals, right? So we've already said that we can define our strategy. We've defined those guidelines, right? And we've published those guidelines, right? You've all said that those guidelines can be published, are published. But how actionable are they? You've just proved that they're not actionable because you've all answered that actually you never look at them, right? You know they're there, but nobody makes you look at them. And as you'll see later, some of our customers, some of your customers have got hundreds of rules. We're working with a large bank at the moment, and they did an audit across their few divisions, and they found, anybody like to guess how many rules they had, writing rules? 100? Yeah. Any advance on 100? 987. We were sent a spreadsheet with their rules in, right? It took the lady, I think, 12 weeks to discover all of these rules and put them in one spreadsheet. I defy anybody to actually read 987 rules and then have them in their mind when they're writing content and try and action them, right? But as an AI tool, as technology, as the keynote said this morning, right? Technology enables you to be exponential in what you can achieve. And what Chris was saying is exactly what we find, right? With technology, we're finding now that actually we can make 600 or 700 of those rules actionable, real-time actionable. Now, the other 300 are emotional things, right? Because it's very hard to say, I should write, let me give you an example. I should write humanely, right? We've seen guidelines like that. How do you tell a computer what humanely is, right? Very hard. So we have to come down to a set of guidelines. But if we can make 600 rules actionable out of 987, we've gone a long way to help people in that company write content based on the guidelines of that company. Right? So a lot of people have a strategy, right? And it looks like that. But in reality, a lot of their content looks like that. Right? They'd like to think they're slick and fast and clear, and actually they're not. Right? But let me give you an example. I've drawn that ring around this roller, right? This tarmac rolling machine, which is, what is that? The cockpit, the cab? How would you describe it? Yeah. So in the same company, these were all the words we found across the company in how the people describe them, right? And we could go on. There's a lot more, right? And that's just terminology, right? So we find hundreds of variations in terminology, right? So, actually maybe it's not even that coherent or joined up, right? But what does this mean for translation, for instance, right? How many of the customers that you work for have business in other countries, in other languages? Right? Many these days, right? So the thing is that if you're not consistent in the way you write, if you're inconsistent in the way you write, and you're not consistent in the words you use, imagine how that proliferates when you come to translation. Right? So the important thing is trying to be clear and concise and correct and consistent at the source. And that's where we help a lot of our customers. So I think we've all proved that some companies have a strategy, they have definitions, but how do you operationalize it? And you might be thinking, why is this important to a DEVCON conference? And I will get to that, I promise. Right? So the first thing that we and the market can do is capture those guidelines, right, and digitize them in rules and patterns and thoughts and views. Because if we can do that, then we can action them. But the second thing is how do you know if you're improving? Anybody here who's got a process background? So what's the first rule of process improvement? You have to know where you started from before you can claim any improvement, right? And a lot of people have no idea. How do I know if I've got good quality? What does good quality mean? How do I give myself a score, right? How do I say where I am, where my benchmark is? And this is what AI can do today. We can start scoring content, right? And give you a score, a number between 0 and 100. And if you do that across all of your content, you then get a score for you and your business, right? And then if your score goes up over a period of time, your business is getting better, your content is getting better. And that's why we link into the data analytics, and it's great to see the progress that Liferay are taking in terms of their data analytics, because we start feeding into those data analytics, right? Because it's not only people reading, the people reading the content on the web, right? You can start relating what they do with your content with the score of your content. And we've seen that with Microsoft. Microsoft had a 7% increase in Net Promoter Score, right? When they basically took the Acrolinx content score and showed and related that to their Net Promoter Score. So there's a direct correlation between your customer experience and satisfaction and the scoring of your content against your goals, and that's the important thing. So it's really important that you take those goals and you deploy them. Now, how do you deploy them? So, what we do and what a number of our competitors do is we give you tools that plug into the authoring tools that you generally use on a daily basis. But most of you don't use general authoring tools, right? What are you coding? How many of you are coders? What are you coding on a daily basis? I bet you're all different, or many of you are different, right? And when you do your documentation to go with your code, do you write that, or do you have technical authors who write that for you? You write it yourselves? Hands for those who write it themselves, right? And how many of you are trained technical authors? Right? And there's an interesting dynamic there, right? In that the work we've done with IBM decided that they would not train their developers to write. They would train technical authors to understand how to code, right? And so they've done that for many years. So basically, coders coded, technical authors wrote the documentation that goes with their code. And now they're doing it differently. Now all their coders write the documentation. And our tool, or these sort of tools, help the coders write good documentation. Because that's not your forte, right? How many of you want to write great content? You do, but how many of you want to be trained for 2 years to be a great technical author? You don't. So you want something that sits on your shoulder, in effect, and helps you write great documentation. And why is that important? Because consistency, rework, across an organization and code is really important. And we'll come on to that, right? So traditionally, we've given anybody who wants the guidance back a sidebar, okay? bar that basically says these are all the problems with the document or the information you're checking, right? And that's great as a single one-to-one, right? And we can do that across hundreds of authoring tools. Right? But the important thing and the biggest thing that we're seeing today is that we're capturing all those analytics, right? So people who write once and see an improvement in there or see the errors very rarely make those mistakes again. So it's like you when you're coding. If you write bad code and it doesn't compile or doesn't build, right? Do you do that again next time? Generally not, right? So this accelerates people's ability to write content really well, right? But how does this relate to you, right? So our view is that automation is the big thing, and I think that's what was talked about a bit this morning, and continuous integration. So we're seeing a lot of development companies who are building their code in an agile way, but how they're building their documentation. So I think some of you said that you know, where does your documentation go? Who approves it? Does it go through your build process of your code? Right. So is your documentation review process as agile and as fast as your code build? All those who say yes, put their hands up. Probably not. Very unlikely, right? But if we could test your documentation and okay, we won't check for all the subject matter expertise, but we can check for all the, you know, and I'll give you, who builds code here that ends up as open source that you share with customers or you build libraries, right? How do you know what you're allowed to put in those open source comments and what you're not allowed to? Sorry, would you mind if I asked you that question? Because you're the only one to put your hand up. Yep. Yep. So you do it by common sense, right? Now, we've worked with a couple of companies where they've got thousands of people producing open source. We found people's names, phone numbers, home phone numbers, right? Wives' names, right? We found secret project names that are secret, right? That should never even be mentioned to half the company, let alone put in open source, right? Competitors' names, competitors' project names, right? It's amazing, actually. If you're not thinking about, because you put things in and you leave them think, oh, I'll take it out later, or I've put it in for a reason, right? It happens, right? And we can take all that out, right? So we're not only about content, and a lot of people think about quality content, about marketing content or support content, but it goes across an organization. But in that way, we automate it because you don't want to have a sidebar that gives you the information. You just want to publish your code. You want it to go through your build process, right? And if it passes, you never want to see it again, right? Do you? Right. So we can automate that processing because, as I told you earlier, we have a score, right? And we break down the score into the different pieces, right? So we can have terminology scores, we can have spelling scores, we can have grammar scores, we can have style scores, clarity, and very interesting SEO scores. And there was a talk about this morning about, I think Chris talked about Google and, about Google allowing you to search and find things. But, the new thing now is about topical authority. The search engines are all about, do you have the authority to write around the subject you are, right? So even if you're writing API documentation and you want it published and you want it found, what are the things you should put in there? That's the sort of thing that we're moving into now about how do you write not only good linguistically correct content, but how do you write it such that it's an authoritative document? And sorry, I'll go back to that. So, and if you're writing applications, right, and part of that application has some content process in it, right, or content is going somewhere, and it doesn't have to be marketing or fluffy content. It can be terms and conditions. It can be transactions, as I'll come on to. But it's about the idea of being able to call services to do that checking and then make decisions on that, on the results, right? And this is what we do. We have, this is a pictorial representation, but this is scorecards. And this is what companies are starting to do, produce scores that give you the ability to say, right, I will pass that information. It goes through my build process because it has a score of, in this case, 83, right? And IBM, for instance, have a project that says, they call it Go Green. So basically 80 and above is green. And if it doesn't go green, it doesn't pass, right? And they have something like 7,000 people doing that on a daily basis. So whatever development tool you're using, whatever build tool you're using, Jenkins, I used to work for Oracle, so I shouldn't talk too much about that because they upset everybody in that business. You know, what content types you use, what review tools, you know, we try and build our technology to allow you to do that. And, you know, don't just think of content as operational, think of it as transactional. But let me give you some of the operational things, right? So, you know, these are a few sort of sound bites. How do we want to sound when people read about us? What impression do they want to get, right? I've had that from a company. Our subject matter, and this is from an insurance company, our subject matter experts spend time correcting spelling mistakes, punctuation, grammar, and more time actually than their subject matter, right? Which is a bit of a waste of time for them, right? And you know, this is another UK one, but the Financial Regulatory Authority, or the FCA, actually mean that we have to check our content for consistency and for messaging every 2 years, right? And does anybody have any idea how many words that you can all read and review in an hour? Any idea? Something like 1,000 words is really good going, right? And some of these companies have 10 million words in these repositories, right? So I'll let you work out the maths, but 1 million words is about 50 man weeks, right? So if you've got 10 million words, right, there's a lot of man weeks that can go into review, right? So not many people do it, right? People skip it, right? They hope it won't come back to haunt them. But it's coming back to haunt people now because it really is a focus of both in the financial services industry. It's about governance and compliance, but it's also about customer experience. So 14 departments contribute to content, affect our customers. How do we ensure we're all on message, right? And our operational language is English, but we have thousands of employees where English is not their natural language, right? And I told you about the 987 rules earlier, right? So lots of examples of that. But one of the biggest growth areas that we're seeing is the idea of transactional content, right? How many trades, how many things that just automate where there are incorrect bits of information in, right? That we can track, we can check real time. So volume, classification, how do you classify content before it goes anywhere? How do you check it? And how do you alert people when there are errors, right? Not manual processes. So we like to believe in something called active content governance, right? So my question is, are you like that? Are you passive about your content? Or are you active? Right? We hope you're the latter rather than the former. But I think after 3 days of conference, you probably are the former rather than the latter, right? But, you know, we serve many of the world's recognizable brands. So yes, we have Microsoft and Google and Oracle, and you know, you'd imagine that Google would be doing this themselves, right? But actually to do this operationally and to do this at scale and to do this, it's really about a linguistic AI, right? So we've got more computational linguists, and that's very hard to say properly, but computational linguists than most companies in the world, right? So I guess, you know, my final thoughts are, you know, don't let your customers be blurry if you're working for them, right? Try and persuade them that not only their content management system or their web content management system is important. Try and explain to them about their content and help them build these processes and help them build their editorial reviews and help them build the way that they change And even personalization of content is important, that it's still on message and it's about an audience, right? Help them be clear, perfect, and precise. So I hope you found that interesting. Thank you very much for coming. Please make sure you rate this app very highly. Otherwise, Jan will come and see you later. No, that's joking. But thank you very much, and I appreciate it. It's the end of the conference, so thank you for your attention.